Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even their silence felt like a promise? Hi guys, can you put your answer in the comment section? And I need you to please subscribe to my channel. It will help me to keep going. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. Now shall we continue? The night I met Noah Shine, the sky didn't sparkle, it sighed. It was one of those evenings that carried a quiet kind of magic, the kind that doesn't demand attention but softly invites you to listen. The breeze from the coast rolled through the streets of Glasshaven, carrying salt, laughter, and the scent of possibility. The Glasshaven Museum shimmered in the distance, its glass walls catching reflections of moonlight and art. It wasn't a loud event, not one of those ostentatious gatherings filled with photographers and champagne towers. It was intimate, selective, the kind of place where conversations were whispered and smiles were currency. I never planned to go. I wasn't dressed like someone who belonged there, at least not by my own standards. My simple silk dress clung to me in a way that made me self-conscious. My hair fell in a loose bun, strands escaping, rebelling as always. I went only because my friend had begged me to fill in for her. An artist she represented had fallen sick, and someone had to stand in to present his piece. That was how I ended up standing beside a marble sculpture of two lovers caught in a frozen embrace, reading off an artist's statement I barely understood. And that was where I saw him. He wasn't the kind of man who announced his presence. There was no loud laugh, no flamboyant gesture, just quiet confidence, the kind that draws eyes without trying. He stood near a painting, a storm at sea, and watched it like he was remembering something. Our eyes met briefly, then drifted apart, only to meet again when I turned. There was an unspoken curiosity there, as though we both recognized something in each other's silence. When he finally approached, his words were gentle, low, and deliberate. "You don't look like you're trying to impress anyone," he said, his lips curving in a faint smile. "Maybe that's why you stand out." I didn't know what to say. I only laughed softly, unsure if it was a compliment or a subtle tease. "And you," I replied, "look like you've seen that painting before." His eyes softened. "I have," he said, "just not with the same ending." That was how it began, our story, not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with quiet sentences that meant everything. For weeks after that, we met by coincidence, or maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. I'd see him at small cafes tucked away from the city's noise, in bookshops where time slowed down, and once, even at the same coastal pier where I went to think. He never rushed conversations. Noah was the kind of man who made silence feel safe. He listened as though every word I said carried weight. He noticed small things like how I traced the rim of my cup when I was nervous, or how I tucked my hair behind my ear when I didn't want to answer a question. I learned that he owned several companies, but he spoke about them as though they were burdens, not trophies. His success didn't glow. It lingered in the background like a shadow that followed him quietly. He didn't like talking about wealth or deals. He liked talking about light, about sound, about the way the sea changed colors depending on its mood. The first time I visited his home, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a mansion screaming for attention. It was a glass-walled house that overlooked the cliffs, with minimal furniture and soft lighting that shifted with the evening. It smelled faintly of cedar and rain. A piano sat by the window, untouched but waiting. "You play?" I asked, brushing my fingers against the keys. "I used to," he said simply. "Now I listen." I didn't press further. But that was the first night I saw him really look at me, not as someone passing through his life, but as someone who might stay. We ate dinner outside that evening, barefoot on the terrace, with nothing but the sound of the ocean beneath us. The stars were out, scattered carelessly across the sky, and he looked up as though he could read something in them. "Do you believe in forever?" he asked suddenly. I hesitated, turning my gaze to him. "I think forever is made up of moments that never end," I said. He smiled faintly. "That sounds like something someone would say right before they change my life." I laughed it off then, not knowing how much truth was hiding in his words. Days turned into weeks. Weeks blurred into months. Noah became my calm, my constant. He wasn't perfect. He had moods he didn't explain, silences that stretched too long, moments when he'd stare at nothing with a kind of ache I couldn't name. but when he was present, he was entirely there. We'd spend evenings cooking together, arguing playfully over recipes neither of us followed properly. He'd hum old songs, off-key but soft. I'd lean against the counter, watching him move through his kitchen with the quiet grace of someone who found peace in routine. We'd talk about dreams. He wanted to disappear one day, to live by the sea without meetings, without expectations. I wanted to write, not about people like him, but about the feeling of being seen for the first time. Sometimes he'd pull me close suddenly, pressing his forehead against mine, whispering, "Don't forget this. Promise me." I'd smile, confused but warm, and promise without knowing what I was promising. There was a time he took me on a trip without saying where we were going. The driver picked me up early in the morning, and we drove through quiet roads until the air turned salty and the city disappeared. We ended up in an old lighthouse on the edge of nowhere. The place was silent except for the crashing waves below. He told me it was the first place he'd ever felt small enough to breathe. I remember us sitting there, eating strawberries from a paper box, laughing about something trivial. He looked at me then with that gaze I'd come to know, the one that felt like sunlight after rain. "You make everything feel less heavy," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because that was the thing about Noah Shine. He never needed 1,000 words. Just one look, and I'd understand what he was trying to say. I started keeping a journal around that time. Every night, I'd write down something about him, a word, a gesture, a sentence he said. I wrote about the way he'd trace patterns on my wrist absent-mindedly when he thought I was asleep, about how he always smelled faintly of oak and peppermint, about how he never rushed anything. Yet somehow everything with him felt fleeting, like we were racing against something unseen. One night, I asked him why he sometimes disappeared for days. His expression dimmed slightly, like I'd touched a scar. "I just need space sometimes," he said quietly. "I don't want to bring the storm with me when I come back." "Then don't," I whispered. "Let me face it with you." He looked at me for a long time before replying. "You don't deserve storms, Lila. You deserve sunlight." I smiled sadly. Even sunlight needs clouds sometimes. That night, he played the piano again. The melody was unfamiliar, slow, aching, beautiful. He didn't say a word afterward, but when he kissed me, it felt like a goodbye he hadn't spoken yet. I didn't know that Act 1 of our love story, The Promise, was already turning into a prelude to heartbreak. I only knew that in that moment, with his arms around me and the sea humming below, I believed in forever. Because sometimes love doesn't announce its ending. Sometimes it begins to fade while you're still convinced it's growing. And if I had known that the same man who made me believe in peace would soon be the reason I learned to live with pain, I would have held him tighter that night. But instead, I closed my eyes, listened to the sound of the piano fading into the wind, and told myself that nothing that beautiful could ever break. The first sign that love was beginning to tremble came quietly. It wasn't a fight or a cold word. It was in the way Noah started to pause before answering questions, like he was editing his heart before he spoke. Lila noticed it first during dinner one evening. The candlelight between them flickered, painting half his face in gold and the other in shadow. She reached across the table to brush her thumb over his hand, and he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. He looked up, that familiar calm in his gaze, but this time there was something else, distance. "Just tired," he replied. "Work's been heavy." She nodded, though she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Lila had always been good at reading silence. She could tell when his silence meant peace and when it meant retreat. But she didn't press him. She told herself that love sometimes meant patience, giving space, waiting for words to come when they're ready. So she kept loving him loudly, even when his quiet grew louder. She'd send him little notes during the day, things like, "Don't forget to smile today," or "Dinner at 7. I'll make that pasta you like." He always replied with heart emojis or short lines, but the warmth she used to feel through those messages seemed to fade each week. One night, Lila woke up to find Noah sitting at the edge of the bed, his back turned, his head bowed. The room was still except for the low hum of the city outside. "Noah," she whispered. He turned, startled, as if caught in a dream he didn't want her to see. "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice rough. She reached out, touching his shoulder. "Talk to me." He hesitated. Then, "Do you ever wonder what life would be like if we hadn't met?" The question cut through her sleepiness like cold air. "Why would you ask that?" she said, sitting up. "Because sometimes I think about the choices that change everything," he murmured, staring at the floor. "And how one day, even love might not be enough." She didn't know what to say. The words felt like a goodbye hiding behind a sentence. She wanted to tell him not to say things like that, not to plant fear in a heart that only wanted him. But he looked so lost, so far from her, that she could only whisper, "You're scaring me, Noah." He looked at her then, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry," he said, taking her hand and kissing it gently. "I didn't mean to," but his apology felt heavy, like it was for something he hadn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, Noah's absences became longer. He'd leave early, return late, sometimes smelling faintly of rain and perfume that wasn't hers. When Lila asked, he always had reasons: meetings, clients, traffic. She wanted to believe him. She did. Until the night she saw him standing across the street under the awning of a cafe, talking to a woman she didn't know. The woman laughed and touched his arm, and Noah didn't move away. Lila froze where she stood, the evening breeze biting her skin. She didn't confront him that night. She went home, sat on the couch, and stared at the clock until he returned. When he walked in, smiling faintly like nothing had changed, she asked quietly, "Who was she?" Noah's expression faltered for a second, then he exhaled. "A client." "She touched your arm," Lila said, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "And you smiled like I wasn't even real." He rubbed his temples, looking tired. "Lila, please. Don't do this tonight." "Don't do what?" she whispered. "Don't feel? Don't ask? Don't notice?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Noah raised his voice. "It's not what you think," he snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell. I'm trying to fix things, and you don't even know how hard it's been." Tears blurred her vision. "Then let me in," she said. "Let me help." He stared at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes, and said, almost to himself, "Some things can't be fixed by love." Then he walked past her and went into the bedroom. Lila stood there for a long time, listening to the silence settle between them like dust. Days turned into weeks, and the house grew quiet in ways she couldn't bear. Noah still came home, but it felt like living with a ghost who wore his face. He would hold her sometimes, but it was out of habit, not desire. He'd kiss her forehead, not her lips. One morning, as the sun poured through the blinds, Lila looked at him across the bed and whispered, "If you're going to leave, at least tell me before you do." He didn't answer. He just lay there, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. She turned away and cried silently, her tears sinking into the pillow. A week later, Noah came home with a look that told her everything before he said a word. His shoulders sagged, his eyes dim. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Her heart sank. She didn't sit down. She couldn't. "Don't," she said. "Please, Noah. Whatever it is, don't." But he reached for her hands, and she felt how cold his fingers were. "I got an offer," he said. "It's in another city. I've been considering it for a while." Her breath caught. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "It's for a few months, maybe longer. I need space, Lila. I need to clear my head." The world tilted. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Space? From me?" He swallowed hard. "It's not about you. It's about me. I've lost myself, and I can't find him here anymore." Her voice broke as she whispered, "But you promised me forever." He closed his eyes. "Forever felt easier when I wasn't drowning." That night, Lila begged him to stay. She cried until her voice was gone, clinging to him as if her touch could change his mind. "Please, Noah," she whispered against his chest. "Don't do this. We can fix whatever's broken." He held her, silent, his hand moving slowly through her hair. Then he kissed her forehead one last time and said the words that shattered her. "I love you, Lila, but love isn't enough right now." The next morning, she woke up to find his side of the bed empty. His clothes were gone. His cologne still lingered in the air like a memory that refused to leave. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door he had walked out through, her chest hollow. The silence was louder than any goodbye. Outside, the city moved on. People laughing, buses honking, the sun rising. But Lila's world stayed frozen in that moment. She stood by the window, watching the world that didn't care that her heart had been left behind. Every sound felt too bright, too alive for the grief she carried. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering his name, as if the wind could carry it to him. But all she heard in return was the echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. That was the day she realized something cruel and beautiful about love. Sometimes it doesn't end with hate or betrayal. Sometimes it ends with silence. And the silence is what kills you slowly. The first morning without Noah felt like waking up in someone else's life. The sheets were cold, the air too still, and even the sunlight that used to warm her skin now felt like it was searching for someone who wasn't there. Lila moved through the apartment like a ghost, touching things that once belonged to both of them. The mug with his chipped initials, the sweater he left draped over the couch, the half-finished book on a nightstand he never came back to read. Everything reminded her of him, and yet everything reminded her that he was gone. For days, she couldn't bring herself to leave the apartment. Her friends called, her mother worried, but Lila just kept saying she was fine. Fine. Such a fragile word. It sat in her throat like a lie she had practiced too long. She'd sit by the window at night, her knees tucked to her chest, staring out at the city lights, wondering if Noah was looking at the same sky, wondering if he missed her at all. It wasn't until a week later that she realized she had stopped eating properly. She was thinner, paler. The mirror showed someone she didn't recognize. Eyes swollen, lips cracked, hair tangled from nights spent crying into the pillow. She tried to pick herself up, telling herself that pain was temporary, that maybe someday she'd stop replaying the sound of the door closing behind him. Then one afternoon, as the sky turned the color of fading amber, Lila walked to the small art studio downtown. It was a place she hadn't been to since before Noah, a space that smelled of paint and turpentine, where she once poured her emotions into colors instead of words. The owner, Mrs. Grayson, was still there, a kind old woman who smiled when she saw Lila step in. "It's been a while, dear," she said softly. Lila nodded. "I thought I'd try again." Mrs. Grayson didn't ask why her voice shook. She simply handed her a canvas and said, "Paint it all out, whatever it is." And so she did. She painted until her hands trembled and her tears fell onto the canvas. She painted the night sky that Noah once said looked like forever. She painted his shadow walking away from her. She painted herself standing at a door that would never open again. When she was done, she felt lighter, not healed, but human again. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, she began to rebuild pieces of herself that she didn't even know were broken. She got a new apartment, smaller, quieter, but her own. She started taking morning walks, cooking simple meals, even smiling at strangers. Sometimes she still thought about Noah, how he held his coffee, how he hummed when he worked, how his laughter used to fill the space between her heartbeats. But she also learned to breathe without him. By the third month, Lila had an exhibition invitation from Mrs. Grayson. "Your art deserves to be seen," the woman had said. "You've turned pain into something beautiful." Lila hesitated, but eventually agreed. The exhibition was held in a modest gallery with cream walls and soft lighting. When she arrived, wearing a navy dress and trembling hands, she didn't expect the crowd that showed up. People stood in front of her paintings, silent, moved. Some whispered words like grief, love, and letting go. For the first time, Lila felt proud of her heartbreak. It had given birth to something real. Then, just as the night began to settle into calm, she heard a voice behind her, soft, familiar, trembling like a forgotten song. "You always did know how to turn pain into art." Her breath caught. She turned slowly, and there he was, Noah Shine, standing by the doorway, dressed in a dark suit, looking older, wearier, but still heartbreakingly familiar. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air thickened with everything unsaid. Lila's fingers tightened around her glass. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but sharp. Noah took a step closer. Mrs. Grayson sent me an invitation, he said, almost apologetically. She didn't know what? Lila interrupted, her tone steady but her chest burning. That you walked out on me? That you left me with promises you didn't keep? He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. Lila, I know I don't have the right to be here, but I had to see it. To see you. She turned her gaze back to the painting nearest to her, the one at the door and the shadow. You're looking at it, she said softly. That's me. That's what you left behind. Noah took another step, his voice trembling now. I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day. But I was falling apart, Lila. I thought if I stayed, I'd drag you down with me. She looked at him, tears pricking her eyes despite herself. You dragged me down anyway, she whispered. You just weren't here to see it. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, surrounded by strangers who saw only art, not the story it came from. Then Noah said, quietly, I came back because I wanted to fix things if you'd let me. Lila stared at him, her heart battling her mind. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to kiss him, to tell him how many nights she prayed he'd come back. But all she could manage was, you can't fix a heart by showing up after it's healed crooked. Noah's eyes dropped to the floor. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. Then he turned slightly, as if to leave, and something in Lila snapped. Noah, wait, she called. He froze. Did you ever love me? He turned back slowly, his eyes filled with something raw. I still do, he said. I just didn't know how to love you and survive at the same time. The words hit her like thunder, soft but devastating. He took a small step closer, hesitant. You look stronger now, he said quietly, and happier. She wiped her tears quickly. That's because I had to be. I didn't have a choice. He nodded, a faint, pained smile ghosting across his lips. Then I guess I did one thing right. You learned to live without me. She stared at him for a long second. Don't flatter yourself, she said, her voice shaking. I didn't learn to live without you. I just learned to live despite you. Noah looked at her as though she had become something holy and unreachable. You were always the stronger one, he murmured. I just wish I'd realized it before I lost you. Lila's eyes softened, even through the ache. You didn't lose me, Noah, she said finally. You let me go. The silence that followed was gentler this time, like closure disguised as quiet. He nodded, stepping back, his eyes shimmering. Goodbye, Lila, he whispered. She exhaled, feeling the ache twist and settle somewhere deep, but no longer unbearable. Goodbye, Noah. He turned and walked out of the gallery, disappearing into the night, just like before. But this time, Lila didn't cry. She simply stood there, looking at the painting of the open door, realizing it no longer felt like loss. It felt like release. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, and as it touched the glass windows, Lila smiled for the first time in months. Not because he had returned, but because she finally understood that sometimes the most painful endings are just disguised beginnings. And for the first time, she whispered not to him, but to herself, you begged him to stay, but you survived when he left. Noah never planned to leave her the way he did. He told himself he needed space, but the truth was uglier than that. He left because he was scared, not of her, but of himself. After his father's sudden death, something inside him cracked. The company he inherited was drowning in debts, lawsuits, and bad deals. Every day he smiled for Lila, pretending to be fine, while inside he was bleeding. He couldn't tell her how close he was to losing everything. He couldn't bear for her to see him as a failure. So one night, when the weight became too heavy to breathe, he packed a bag and left without looking back. The city he moved to was quieter, colder. He rented a small apartment near the pier where the air smelled of salt and rust. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd return once he fixed things. But weeks turned into months, and guilt grew like vines around his chest. Every morning, he reached for his phone, thinking of calling her, and every morning, fear stopped him. What would he even say? I left because I loved you too much to show you how broken I was? It sounded pathetic even in his own head. He tried to bury himself in work. He rebuilt the company piece by piece, taking meetings in small cafes, convincing investors who barely trusted him, sleeping in his office when exhaustion won. On his desk, he kept a small photograph, the one of Lila laughing, her head tilted back, sunlight catching her hair. Sometimes, when the world was too loud, he'd close his eyes and whisper her name just to remember what peace sounded like. But love doesn't stay frozen. It moves, changes, learns to breathe without you. Noah realized that the day he saw her name in a newspaper headline, local artist transforms heartbreak into hope. There was a small picture, her standing in front of a painting, her smile faint but real. He traced the outline of her face with his thumb, his throat tight. She looked stronger, freer. And that was when it hit him. She had finally done what he couldn't. She had healed. He told himself he should be happy for her, that this was what love was supposed to mean, wanting someone's peace, even if it wasn't with you. But the more he told himself that, the emptier he felt. Nights became longer, the silence heavier. He started dreaming about her again, dreams where she turned to him, but her face kept fading before he could touch her. He'd wake up gasping, his heart racing, his chest aching with a longing that had nowhere to go. One rainy afternoon, Noah found himself standing outside the art gallery where her exhibition was being held. He hadn't planned to go. His car had driven itself there, guided by some invisible pull. He stood across the street for nearly 10 minutes, watching her through the glass. She was speaking to a group of guests, her voice calm, her gestures graceful. And even from that distance, he could tell she had changed. There was light in her now, the kind that comes only after you've survived darkness. He almost turned away. He almost left again, like a ghost haunting the edges of her life. But then he remembered the last thing she said to him before he left. If you're going to walk away, at least tell me before you do. He hadn't told her then. Maybe this was his chance to finally give her that honesty. So he walked in. Seeing her up close again was like remembering how to breathe after being underwater for too long. Every heartbeat hurt. She didn't notice him at first. When she finally did, her smile faltered, that same flicker of disbelief and pain. He wanted to speak, but his voice had forgotten how. When she finally asked, "What are you doing here?" he had no good answer. Just the truth, that he couldn't stay away any longer. When he told her he left to find himself, he saw the disappointment flash in her eyes. She didn't need his excuses. She needed his presence, and he had taken that away from her. When she said, "You dragged me down anyway. You just weren't here to see it," he wanted to fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness. But what right did he have? She had built herself from the ruins he left behind, and he couldn't ruin that again. After he left the gallery that night, Noah didn't go home. He wandered the streets, drenched in rain, replaying her words over and over. "You didn't lose me, Noah. You let me go." He realized then that she was right. Love isn't something you lose. It's something you fail to hold when it mattered most. In the weeks that followed, Noah tried to move forward. He poured himself into charity work, reopened his father's foundation, and started mentoring young entrepreneurs who had nothing but dreams. On the surface, he was doing well. But at night, when the world was quiet, he still saw her face. Not the woman who had forgiven him, but the one who begged him to stay. One evening, he received a letter. It wasn't from Lila, but from Mrs. Grayson, written in her neat, slanted handwriting. "She's leaving for Paris," it read. "A residency program. 6 months. She didn't want to tell you, but I thought you should know. Closure is only real when both hearts hear it." Noah sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. Paris, a city of art, love, and beginnings. She was starting a new chapter, and once again, he wasn't part of it. But this time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like destiny, like the universe giving her the happiness he couldn't. Still, he needed to see her one last time. Not to stop her, not to make her stay, but to say goodbye properly. So the next morning, he drove to her apartment just as she was loading a suitcase into a cab. She froze when she saw him. "Noah," she said softly, her voice carrying both surprise and calm. "How did you—" "Mrs. Grayson," he said with a small, sad smile. For a moment, neither spoke. The cab driver looked away politely, pretending not to listen. Noah stepped closer, the rain beginning to fall again, gentle and cold. "I just came to wish you well," he said. Paris will love you. They'll see what I saw before I ever said it out loud. She looked at him, her eyes soft but guarded. You didn't have to come. I did, he whispered, because this time I didn't want to walk away without telling you I was going to. A faint smile curved her lips. You've learned. He nodded. Too late, but yes. She hesitated, then said, I hope you find peace, Noah. He swallowed hard. I already did, he said quietly, the day I realized you deserved more than my chaos. She stared at him for a long moment, then gently reached out, brushing her hand against his arm, just once like a memory, saying goodbye. Take care of yourself, she whispered. You too, he said. As the cab pulled away, Noah stood there in the rain, watching her disappear into the city. For the first time, he didn't chase her. He didn't beg or break. He just stood still, letting the rain wash away what remained of his regrets. Somewhere deep inside, he finally understood what love really meant. Not holding on, but letting go without bitterness. When the cab vanished from sight, Noah smiled faintly to himself. She begged him to stay once. And now, he was the one who stayed behind, not out of weakness, but out of peace. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when not to follow. The rain hadn't stopped since the night he left. It was as if the sky was mourning with me, weeping for everything we could have been. The days blurred into nights, and the nights were longer than I ever remembered them being. Sometimes I catch myself listening for his footsteps in the hallway, the sound that used to mean safety. But there was only silence now, thick and endless. I still woke up at 6 a.m., out of habit, to brew 2 cups of coffee. His remained untouched, growing cold, like every promise he once made. The apartment still smelled faintly of him, that mix of cedarwood and mint, but I wished it didn't. It was cruel. How scent could haunt you more than memory. Work felt like another life I had no interest in returning to. Every model smile I gave was an act. Every pose a performance for an audience that couldn't see the grief tucked beneath my ribs. I started turning down jobs, one after another, until even my manager stopped calling. Everyone thought I was healing in silence, but I was drowning quietly, and nobody noticed. I replayed that last night in my head like a broken tape. The way his hand slipped from mine. The way he couldn't even look back. The words I wanted to say froze in my throat. The apology, the plea, the simple don't go. One evening, I sat by the window watching the city lights blink like fireflies on the edge of sleep. My phone buzzed and my heart jumped. I thought it might be him, some fragment of hope telling me he missed me, that he made a mistake. But it was Stella, my friend, checking if I want to go out for dinner. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, maybe another time. She meant well, but she couldn't understand that I didn't know how to be around laughter anymore. Every happy sound reminded me of what I'd lost. That night, I took out the box I had hidden under my bed, the one filled with the pieces of our story. The ticket stub from the fair where he won me that ridiculous teddy bear. The small seashell he picked up on our first beach trip, saying it matched my laugh. A note he once left on the fridge that said, "Don't forget to eat, sunshine." My hands trembled as I touched each one. These were not just things, they were ghosts, small and powerful. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that he was gone, or the thought that I might have driven him away. At 3 a.m., I went outside. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened like glass. The city was silent except for the soft hum of distant traffic. I walked without direction, barefoot, in a thin sweater that did nothing against the cold. My heart was heavy, but my mind was strangely clear. Somewhere between the echo of my footsteps and the chill of the wind, I realized something. Noah wasn't my healing. He was my lesson. I had loved him more than I loved myself, and that was where I lost. I had made him the center of a world that was supposed to be mine too. When dawn came, I stood at the bridge we once walked together, when life still felt like a fairy tale. I whispered his name into the morning mist, not to call him back, but to let him go. My voice cracked, but it carried soft, fragile, free. The sky began to lighten, streaks of gold breaking through the gray. And for the first time in months, I took a deep breath without crying. Maybe this was what healing really was, not forgetting him, but remembering myself. Days passed, then weeks. I started saying yes again, to walks, to laughter, to coffee that didn't need 2 cups. I sold the apartment. The empty rooms no longer felt like home. They felt like memory. I moved into a smaller place near the harbor where the air smelled like salt and possibility. Sometimes I'd still dream of him. Not the man who left, but the one who once held me as if I was the only thing that made sense. And when I woke up, I no longer reached for my phone. I simply smiled, grateful that I once got to love that deeply, even if it didn't last. One evening, months later, I stood on the pier watching the horizon swallow the sun. The sky burned orange, the same color as his eyes when he left. I took a picture, not for him, but for me. The wind carried a faint warmth across my face, and I whispered again, softly this time, "Thank you for leaving." Because if he hadn't, I would never have found the strength to stay for myself. Healing never happens all at once. It comes in fragments, in mornings that don't hurt as much, in laughter that sneaks up on you, in songs you once avoided but now hum again without breaking. That was how it began for me, little by little. One breath, one sunrise, one decision at a time. My new apartment was smaller, but it had something the old one didn't: peace. It faced the harbor, and every morning the sound of seagulls and the crash of waves greeted me like a gentle reminder that life still moved. I started walking along the pier again, notebook in hand, jotting down thoughts that came with the wind. Some days they turned into poetry, other days just scattered sentences, but they were mine. For the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. I found work again, not in front of the camera, but behind it. A friend connected me to a small agency that needed creative direction for new fashion campaigns. The hours were flexible, the pay modest, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I could create again. There was a quiet joy in watching others come alive in front of the lens, in helping them tell their own stories while I slowly began rewriting mine. The first shoot I worked on was at sunrise. The light was golden, soft, forgiving. I remember standing there, camera in hand, watching the model spin freely in a flowing white dress, her laughter echoing through the wind. For a fleeting second, I felt it: freedom, the kind I thought I'd lost when Noah walked away. Evenings became my favorite time. I make a cup of tea, sit by the window, and watch the city lights flicker like heartbeats. Sometimes, Stella would call and talk for hours about her new job, her dating disasters, or random gossip. I'd laugh again, real laughter this time, the kind that comes from the chest, not the throat. She'd pause and say, "You sound like you again, Lila." I'd smile, not knowing how to explain that I was only now learning who that truly was. One weekend, she convinced me to go on a short getaway. "You need the sun, the beach, and maybe a stranger's smile," she teased. We ended up in a quiet coastal town a few hours away, a place so still it felt like time forgot it. On the second evening, as we sat outside a small cafe overlooking the sea, the air was warm, the world unhurried. That's when I noticed him, a man sitting alone at the next table, sketching on a small pad. He looked up briefly, caught my gaze, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that asks for anything, but the kind that simply says, "I see you. Pin it when you get home." I tucked it into my bag and didn't look at it until the night after I returned. It was a sketch of me standing by the waves, my hair dancing in the wind, eyes closed, smiling faintly. Beneath it, he'd written, "She looks like someone who finally forgave the storm." I stared at it for a long time before the tears came. Not of pain this time, but of release. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was finally forgiving the storm that once drowned me. The following weeks felt lighter. Work became a joy again, not a burden. I redecorated my apartment, painted the walls soft beige, added green plants, and bought a record player. Music filled the space once more, and I found myself dancing while cooking dinner, laughing at nothing, humming while cleaning. The girl who once begged a man to stay had now learned to stay for herself. Sometimes late at night, I'd still think of Noah, not with anger or sadness, but with a strange, quiet gratitude. He had broken me, yes, but he had also made me find the strength I never knew I had. One evening, as I was walking back from the pier, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. My heart skipped, stupidly, before I answered. "Lila," a familiar voice said softly. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was Noah. "I didn't think you'd pick up," he added. I stood frozen, listening to the sound of his voice, older, heavier, but still him. "What do you want, Noah?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause before he said, "To say I'm sorry. For everything." I closed my eyes. The waves crashed faintly in the background, the same rhythm that once held us together. "I know," I whispered, "but some things don't need fixing anymore." He sighed, almost in relief. "I just needed to know you're okay." "I am," I said, and for the first time it was the truth. We said goodbye, and this time it didn't hurt. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and kept walking, the night air cool and forgiving against my skin. The past had finally stopped chasing me. At home, I lit a candle and placed Jack's sketch by my window. The flame flickered gently, its light dancing across the paper. I whispered to myself, "You made it," and maybe that was all I ever needed to hear. He thought walking away would save her, that leaving would protect her from the ruin he'd become. But time had proven him wrong in every possible way. The night Noah Shine walked out of Lila's apartment, he didn't go home. He drove aimlessly, the city lights melting into a blur of regret through the windshield. He kept driving until dawn, when exhaustion forced him to stop by the side of a quiet road on the city's edge. He sat there for hours, staring at nothing, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding him together. Noah had built his life on control. Every move, every word, every smile, rehearsed, managed, perfect. But with Lila, that control crumbled. She saw through the walls he'd spent years building. She noticed things, the flicker of unease in his eyes when she mentioned family, the way he tightened his jaw when she said forever. She made him feel seen, and that terrified him. Because the truth was, Noah had never learned how to stay. Before Lila, there had been years of chaos. His father had died suddenly when he was 21, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a company on the verge of collapse. Noah had spent his youth fixing mistakes he didn't make, carrying responsibilities that weren't his. He became the man everyone depended on, reliable, composed, untouchable. Love, he told himself, was a distraction he couldn't afford. But then came Lila. Her laughter, her light, her ability to find joy in the simplest things. She made him believe in calm again. For a while, he thought maybe he could have both, love and control, peace and purpose. But the closer she got, the more afraid he became that she'd see the cracks he couldn't fix. When he started missing meetings, losing focus, forgetting who he was supposed to be in the world, panic took over. His business partner, Victor, noticed it first. "You're slipping, Noah," he'd said one night in the office, voice sharp. "You're letting your emotions ruin everything we built." Noah had laughed it off, but the words stayed. He'd worked too hard to be seen as weak again. So he made the cruelest choice. He left before she could see him fall apart. The months after their breakup were quiet, but not peaceful. He buried himself in work, meetings, endless travel, anything that kept him from thinking. But no matter where he went, he couldn't outrun her. She was in the sound of rain against glass, in the scent of coffee every morning, in the silence of hotel rooms that felt too empty. He tried to convince himself it was for the best, that she'd move on and forget him. But guilt had a way of echoing louder than reason. One evening, while in Los Angeles for a deal, he saw her face again, not in person, but on a billboard, a campaign she had directed for a fashion brand. Her name was in small letters at the bottom, but he recognized her style instantly, soft light, warm tones, emotion in every frame. She looked happy in the behind-the-scenes clip that played beneath it. Her laughter, that sound he once lived for, filled the air. His chest tightened. She had moved on. She was shining again without him. That should have made him happy. It didn't. It broke something in him. He didn't call her that night. He didn't call her for weeks. But every night, he'd scroll through old messages, reread the things she once said. "You make me feel safe. I love how quiet feels different with you. Promise me we'll never be strangers." That last one stung the most. Because they were strangers now, by his choice. Then came the news that made him stop running. Victor had been caught embezzling funds, and the company they'd built together collapsed overnight. The press tore into it, clients fled, and Noah was left to face the wreckage alone. For the first time in years, he had no one to blame, nowhere to hide. The empire he'd sacrificed everything for, even her, was gone. He sold what he could, paid what debts remained, and disappeared from the public eye. For months, he lived quietly in a small cabin by the coast, writing, sketching, existing. It was there, among the salt air and silence, that he began to understand what he'd done. He hadn't left Lila to protect her. He had left her because he didn't believe he deserved her, because love, to him, had always been something that ended in loss. But the truth he couldn't escape was that losing her was worse than anything else he'd survived. He remembered her tears that night, the way her voice broke when she said his name. He'd replayed it 100 times, tried to convince himself it was mercy. It wasn't. It was cowardice. The day he decided to call her, his hand shook. It had been nearly a year since he last heard her voice. He rehearsed what he'd say a dozen times, then finally dialed her number. When she answered, the silence between them stretched like time itself. "Lila," he said softly, almost afraid the sound of her name might hurt her. "I didn't think you'd pick up." He could hear the steadiness in her breathing, different now, stronger. When she asked what he wanted, he almost couldn't speak. The apology that came out felt too small for the years of ache he'd caused. "I'm sorry. For everything." Her reply was simple, but it cut deep. Some things don't need fixing anymore. It was then he knew she had healed, not around him, but without him. That truth was both beautiful and brutal. When she said she was okay, he believed her. And when she said goodbye, he didn't stop her. He sat there for hours after the call ended, staring at the ocean, the same waves that once carried their laughter. He whispered her name once more, not to bring her back, but to finally set her free in his heart. Now he lives quietly. He paints, something he never had time for before. His walls are filled with colors that remind him of her: golds, blues, silvers, and sunsets. Sometimes he sketches her from memory, though her face has softened in his mind. He never tries to find her, never searches her name online. But he hopes, in some quiet corner of the world, she's still smiling the way she used to. The way she did before he broke her heart. One afternoon, while walking along the coast, Noah sees a young couple laughing by the water. The girl's hair catches the light, just like Lila's used to, and for a heartbeat, the ache returns, softer now, more like nostalgia than pain. He smiles faintly and whispers to himself, "She begged me to stay, but I walked away." And maybe that's how I learned that love doesn't wait for the broken. It rebuilds without them. The wind carries his words into the sea, and for the first time, he doesn't feel empty, just human. The world has a strange way of bringing people back together. Not when you want it, but when you finally stopped waiting. It had been 2 years since Lila last heard Noah's voice. 2 years since the final call that ended with peace instead of tears. Life had become still and full for her now. Her creative direction work had flourished beyond what she ever imagined. The small agency that once gave her a chance had grown under her influence. Her ideas had shaped campaigns that spoke to emotion rather than perfection. People loved that about her, that she saw beauty not in flawlessness but in truth. She had found herself again. It was a bright spring morning when Stella called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Lila, you won't believe this," she said. "You've been invited to speak at the Creative Hearts Conference in New York next month. They want you to talk about emotional storytelling in photography." Lila froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. The Creative Hearts Conference. It was one of the biggest events in the industry, filled with designers, directors, and entrepreneurs from all over the world. It was also the kind of event Noah used to attend religiously. But that thought didn't shake her as much as it once would have. She smiled and said, "All right, let's do it." Weeks passed quickly. The conference hall was massive, glass ceilings, white marble floors, and walls covered with light projections of art and design. Lila felt a soft hum of nerves as she stepped onto the stage for her panel. She wasn't the kind of woman who loved attention anymore, but she had learned to carry grace quietly. Her voice was calm as she spoke about honesty in art, about how pain could shape beauty, and how every picture carried a story waiting to be heard. When she finished, the applause was warm, genuine, unforced. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, as she stepped down from the stage and mingled among the guests. That was when she saw him. He was standing near one of the large glass walls, sunlight spilling over his face. Noah shined. His hair was a little longer, his jaw slightly rougher, his shoulders carrying a calm she had never seen before. He wasn't the man who left, not entirely. He looked like someone who had been humbled by time, softened by regret, and rebuilt by solitude. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the hall disappeared. The world shrank to that familiar ache between them. She blinked first, looked away, and turned toward a table of guests, pretending to listen. But she felt him moving closer. "Lila," he said, his voice quiet but sure. It wasn't the trembling voice she remembered from that last call. It carried peace now. She turned slowly, her breath catching for the briefest second. "Noah," she said, just his name, nothing else. It hung between them like an old song, remembered, but no longer painful. They walked outside to the garden terrace, where the spring air carried the scent of flowers and faint music from inside. For a while, neither spoke. It wasn't awkward, just heavy with all the things that didn't need to be said. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "You look happy." She smiled faintly. "I am." He nodded. "Good. You deserve to be." His voice cracked just slightly at the end, and she noticed. "And you?" she asked gently. "Have you found peace?" He exhaled softly, looking toward the sky. "I think so. It took a while. Losing everything made me realize I was never meant to have all. Just meant to learn from it." They both stood quietly, watching the wind move through the trees. "I saw your work," he said after a moment. "The campaigns, the photos. They're beautiful. You always had that gift." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said. "And you? Still building empires?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "No empires. Just paintings now. Quiet things. They don't make money, but they keep me breathing." She smiled, not out of pity, but understanding. They were no longer the same people who once clung to perfection. They were just two souls who had learned what mattered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something, a folded sketch. "I made this a while ago," he said, handing it to her. She hesitated before unfolding it. It was a sketch of the ocean with a single figure standing by the shore, hair loose, eyes closed at peace. Her heart trembled. It was her. "You still remember," she whispered. "Always," he said softly. "But I don't hold on anymore. I just remember." There was a silence, tender and whole. She folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "It belongs to you." She smiled, this time fully. "No, Noah. It belongs to who we were." He nodded slowly, understanding. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to think love was about holding on, but maybe it's about knowing when to let go." She looked at him, eyes glistening in the sunlight. "Maybe it's both," she said, "holding on to what it taught us, letting go of what it cost." The music from inside drifted through the open doors, a slow, soft piano tune that made her heart ache gently. Noah looked at her one last time, his voice a whisper. "I'm proud of you, Lila." She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "And I'm proud of you, too. You learned to stay, even if it wasn't with me." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes, warm and final. "Goodbye, Lila." "Goodbye, Noah." She watched him walk away, not with pain this time, but with peace. Each step he took felt like the closing of a chapter. Not sad, just complete. When he disappeared through the hall doors, she turned back toward the garden. The sky was the same shade of gold it had been the night she first met him, but now it meant something different. It meant healing. It meant freedom. Later that evening, as she sat by her hotel window overlooking the city, she unfolded the sketch again. Her eyes lingered on the waves, the stillness of the figure, the quiet grace of it all. She took a deep breath, reached for her pen, and wrote beneath it in tiny cursive letters. She begged him to stay, but he walked away. And yet, she learned to stay for herself. When she set it down, she smiled, the soft, quiet kind that only comes when your heart is finally light. Outside, the city shimmered, alive and endless. Somewhere out there, Noah was looking at the same sky, and for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against her chest and made her heartbeat sound like thunder. Lila sat by the window, wrapped in one of Noah's old sweatshirts, the one that still faintly smelled like him even after months. Outside, the rain whispered against the glass, tracing thin lines like teardrops. She didn't cry this time. She had done enough of that. She only stared, as if staring long enough might summon him back. There was no message, no call, just emptiness, like a book missing its last chapter. Every night since he left, she still heard the echo of his voice in the walls. "You'll be fine without me, Lila." But she wasn't. She wasn't fine, not even close. When she went back to work at the design studio, she threw herself into projects that didn't make sense. Her colleagues praised her for her focus. Her boss said she was finally stepping into her creative power. But what they didn't know was that every sketch she made, every curve of a dress, every color combination, carried the outline of Noah. The world saw art. She saw grief stitched into silk. Then one morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, creased, sealed, and written in his handwriting. She froze, tracing her fingers over her name on the envelope like it might vanish if she touched it too hard. The return address read Miles Medical Foundation. Her stomach dropped. She tore it open. "Lila, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I want to tell you the truth sooner, but I couldn't find the courage. I was sick long before I met you. Something my doctors said couldn't be fixed. I thought I could beat it. I thought love could outlast pain. But when I saw what it was doing to you, how much you worried, I couldn't let you waste your heart watching me fade. I left because I wanted you to remember me alive, not dying. I wanted you to carry light, not sorrow. If I stayed, you would have tried to save me, and I would have let you destroy yourself trying. You once told me love isn't about how long it lasts, but how deeply it's felt. Thank you for making my last days full of color. You were my calm, my reason, my favorite piece of time. Love always. Noah." The letter slipped from her hands. Her knees hit the floor, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her body trembled, not from shock, but from the weight of everything she hadn't said. She thought he left because he stopped loving her. She thought she wasn't enough. But all along, he had left because he loved her too much to let her break. Lila stayed there for a long time, surrounded by the pieces of him that words couldn't hold. She felt anger, sadness, but beneath it all, peace. A quiet, painful kind of peace. She finally understood the look he gave her the night he walked away, the one filled with love and apology tangled together. Weeks passed, and she began to heal in tiny ways. She started painting again. She smiled at strangers. She even laughed once when Zoe made her watch an old rom-com. The laughter felt strange, like sunlight sneaking into a locked room. But it felt good. One afternoon, she visited the Miles Medical Foundation. The receptionist handed her a folder Noah had left behind for her. Inside was a sketchbook, filled with designs they had made together. The last page had a drawing of a white dress. Beneath it, in his handwriting, "For the woman who taught me what forever means." That night, she sat in her studio and finished the dress. Every stitch was a goodbye, every bead a memory. When it was done, she didn't cry. She just smiled through the ache, whispering, "You stay, Noah. You never really left." Months later, she hosted an exhibit, a collection called The Ones Who Stayed. Each design carried a story of loss, of love, of light breaking through grief. Critics called it her best work. To Lila, it was simply a way to breathe again. As she stood before the crowd, cameras flashing, applause echoing, she felt something warm in her chest, like Noah was there, somewhere between the lights and the air. And for the first time since he left, she didn't feel alone. Because maybe love doesn't end when someone walks away. Maybe it stays in the scent of rain, in the curve of a smile, in the quiet moments where you still feel them beside you. And as Lila whispered a soft thank you to the universe, she realized some people never really leave. They just live differently inside you. Time didn't heal her. It reshaped her. It bent around the edges of her pain and carved out spaces where light could finally reach. The ache never fully left, but Lila learned how to live beside it. Some mornings still hurt like open wounds, but others came soft and forgiving, wrapping her in the quiet warmth of acceptance. 6 months after Noah's letter arrived, the city had changed. Or maybe she had. The streets she used to walk with him now carried echoes, not ghosts. She started taking the long route home, past the park where they once fed pigeons, past the bridge where he told her that love wasn't something you fall into, but something you grow. She smiled at the memory now instead of breaking down. At work, her designs began to bloom again. Her sketches weren't filled with sorrow anymore, but with gratitude. The dresses she made shimmered with meaning, soft layers that seemed to carry emotion inside them. The press called her the woman who stitches stories into silk. She didn't correct them. That was who she had become. One morning, Zoe walked in the studio, eyes gleaming. "You've been invited to the Radiant Awards," she said, holding an envelope like it was something sacred. "They want to honor your collection, the ones who stayed." Lila blinked, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She had seen that award night 100 times in magazines, but she never imagined being the one called on stage. She opened the envelope, scanning the letter. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a nomination. The night of the ceremony arrived, glittering and alive. The venue stood tall and golden, its high glass walls catching the light like a dream. Inside, people shimmered in silk and sequins, champagne flowing like melody. It wasn't a gala, not a penthouse, but something gentler, timeless elegance wrapped in warmth. When her name was called, she froze for half a breath before Zoe nudged her forward. The applause filled the air, and Lila walked up the stage in a flowing white gown, the one she had finished from Noah's sketchbook. Every step felt like a heartbeat. When she reached the microphone, she could barely speak. "I used to think love was something you lose," she began softly, voice trembling. "But I've learned that sometimes love just changes form. It becomes the air you breathe, the people you meet, the art you create. It doesn't vanish, it transforms." The hall went still, the kind of silence that listens. She looked up, smiling through her tears. "This dress was designed by someone I loved, someone who taught me that forever doesn't mean endless time. It means unforgettable moments. So wherever you are, Noah Miles, this is for you." The applause that followed felt like thunder, like release. Cameras flashed, lights shimmered, but all Lila saw was a blur of gold and memory. For a moment, she swore she saw him, standing by the back door, smiling the way he used to. Her heart fluttered, and she closed her eyes. Maybe it was her mind, or maybe it was something more. Either way, she felt peace. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights flickered in the distance, the wind playing with her hair. Zoe joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "He'd be proud, you know," Zoe said softly. Lila nodded, staring at the stars. "He already is." She raised her glass toward the sky, to the ones who stay, even when they leave. The stars blinked above her like small, knowing eyes. Somewhere in the rhythm of the night, she felt it, a warmth brushing her soul, like Noah whispering back, "You made it, Lila." And just like that, she smiled. Not the broken kind this time. A real, full smile, the kind that starts from the heart and lights up everything around it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Love hadn't left her after all. It had simply changed shape, becoming her strength, her art, her story. And through every creation, every breath, Noah lived on. It was spring again, the same season when she met him, the same air that carried the scent of lilac and promise. The city seemed softer now, bathed in sunlight that spilled over the rooftops and touched everything with quiet warmth. Lila stood in front of the new studio she'd opened, the Miles Atelier. She'd named it after him, not because she wanted the world to remember him, but because she wanted her world to never forget. Inside, the walls were lined with photos from her journey. Her first sketches, the collection that made her name, the night she held her award and whispered his name under her breath. In the corner stood a mannequin wearing the white dress, Noah's design, her completion. A small plaque beneath it read, "For the love that taught me to stay." The studio had become more than a business. It was a space for young designers who had lost something, people who carried grief, heartbreak, or dreams too heavy for their own hands. She taught them to turn pain into beauty, just as she once did. Every stitch, every hem, every design held stories of those who stayed behind and those who left too soon. One morning, a young man entered the atelier. He was nervous, holding a portfolio that shook slightly in his grip. "Miss Lila Miles?" he asked, voice low. She looked up from her table and smiled at the name. She'd kept Noah's surname, not as a widow would, but as someone still keeping a promise. "Yes," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" He handed her the folder. "My mother used to tell me about your work. She said your designs helped her believe again after my dad died. I want to learn from you, to create something that makes people feel less alone." Lila took the folder, her fingers brushing against his. The determination in his eyes reminded her of Noah, the same quiet strength, the same spark. She nodded. "Then you're exactly where you need to be." That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the wide windows, she guided him through his first sketch. She watched him draw, watched the way he frowned in concentration, and something in her chest lifted. Maybe this was what healing looked like, continuing what love started. When evening came, she walked to the park near her studio, the one where she and Noah used to sit. She carried a small bouquet of white lilies, his favorite. The bench was still there, weathered but sturdy. She sat, placing the flowers beside her. The wind was cool, brushing her face like a whisper. "I did it, Noah," she murmured, eyes on the sunset. "You were right. Love doesn't end. It just becomes something else." She paused, smiling faintly. "You stayed with me in all the ways that matter." The sky burned gold, then melted into rose and violet. She stayed there until the first stars appeared, listening to the world breathe. Somewhere in that silence, she felt him again, not in the ache this time, but in the peace. When she stood to leave, she glanced back at the bench. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a figure sitting there, a man, his head tilted slightly, the ghost of a smile on his lips. But when she blinked, it was gone. Only the flowers remained, swaying gently in the breeze. She didn't need to see him. She didn't need proof. She already knew. As she walked home, her phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. "Proud of you, Lila. He'd be smiling right now." She typed back, "He already is." And with that, she put her phone away, lifted her face to the stars, and whispered one last time, "Thank you for staying, even when you left." The wind carried her words away, scattering them into the night. Somewhere beyond what eyes could see, love answered, not in sound, but in the stillness that follows peace. Because love, real love, never truly ends. It simply learns how to stay.